It's cool, it's autumn weather, it's October, and I'm doing another cemetery tour. This time I'm in Sturgis, Michigan at the Oak Lawn Cemetery, and we're about to learn some history about some of the people that are buried here at Oak Lawn Cemetery. So come along and join me.
Thank you for coming today. I'm Diane Gorsuch. I'm going to be your leader, and I'll throw in a few things as we go along. This is our second one, as you probably know, and the first one was like 99 degrees, so you're going to luck out here. I'm going to stand on the powder in trouble. Our civic players are our volunteers at each one of the graves, and the Sturgis Auditorium and the Sturgis Historical Society have partnered to do this. And Sturgis Bank and Trust has so graciously paid for everything. So all the profits that we make today go to the Historical Society, and that helps us keep our museum going. So thank you for coming.
Well, hi there, folks. It's so nice of you to come by and visit. Even though it's been 130 years since our passing, it's still very special to us that you're still like taking the time to stop by and be with us.
And I certainly agree with my wife. It is nice to be remembered after all this time.
But I guess if you think about it, our last name is the name of the town. Kind of hard to forget.
Indeed. And to think how close this town came to being called Ardillacy. Do you folks know the biscuit story? Have you heard it? Oh, it's a great story.
Oh, honey, you don't really believe Governor Cass really named Sturgis after little old me.
Of course I do. He told me that he never forgot that cold winter day when he and his survey crew were working just outside our little cabin. And it was some time ago, now that I think about it. But apparently my wife felt bad because she saw them out the window and they were shivering. So she took them out a pan of biscuits, fresh from the oven, to help warm them up. Say, did that really happen?
Well, yes. They just look so cold and miserable out there. I just couldn't stand it. I never dreamed that one of them would remember such a thing, or that they would go on to become the governor of Michigan. Oh, for heaven's sakes!
Or to name a town in St. Joseph County after you.
Oh.
It's a good story. But those were the days, weren't they, my dear?
Yes, I guess you're right. They were. But believe you me, I remember some things that were not so nice. Why, when we came on that treacherous trip from Monroe, Michigan to St. Joseph County, we spent 20 days. 20 days! Going in a covered wagon just filled to the brim with all of our earthly possessions.
Mm-hmm.
And for those 20 days, I am looking at the back end of a team of oxen. It was a nightmare. Well, I was pretty sure we were never going to make it to our destination.
Well, I have to agree. 20 days of slogging through every kind of nasty terrain imaginable, getting stuck in the mud. Why, do you remember how many times we got so bogged down that we had to unload the wagon just to get the wagon unstuck? It seemed like 2 years to me. And I often thought maybe I'd made a mistake dragging you away from all we'd known up there.
And that tiny cabin on Chicago Road.
Ah, yes.
That was until we built the beautiful new house out on the farm. And there we grew a family of 12 children. Oh, yes. It was just as splendid and abundant as our crops.
Oh, yeah.
Ah, yes, it was a great life. And you know, we were blessed with some fertile farmland, lakes. There were lakes around, and good water, and a passel of sons to help me do the farm work.
Yes, we have plenty.
I knew that St. Joseph County was a special place when George Thurston and I first got here and ventured around and looked at this area. Yep, we just knew it was special.
And before you adventurers knew it, a settlement was born here. And after that, you got to watch it become a town
Yes.
and then a city. Oh my! And plus, in addition to being a very successful farmer, you became a judge. Oh, folks, we had quite the life here in Sturgis.
Yes, it was a great life. And Ardillacy was always there. My friend, my wife, the mother of my children, always my greatest supporter.
I loved it too, my dear. How could we ever have known when we came from Monroe that it would mean so much to us and to them?
Well, thanks for coming by, folks. It was really great to see all of you.
Thank you.
Don't you think that after everything that we have done to help build this city up, they would at least named it after us? Darn biscuits.
Yes, Jonathan, I agree. Oh, hello everyone. We are Susan and Jonathan Waite.
Yes, welcome. Susan and I here were just discussing everything that we have done to help build up the city of Sturgis, a place that we've called home for nearly 3/4 of a century.
We were involved with everything, politics, business, even the religious life of Sturgis.
Actually, people of your day might have even called us Sturgis' first power couple.
We we go way back, that's for sure, but I had moved to Sturgis way before he did. I actually moved here when I was 7 years old, and my parents, George and Mary Buck, they were the first settlers to build the first log cabin within the current city limits of Sturgis. I attended the local school where Jonathan became the teacher in 1835.
Yes, teaching was my first profession, but I had many irons in the fire. The very same year I moved here, I started a furniture company where we built fine shoes, boots, and coffins. You know, you might even say we could fit you in anything.
You had accomplished a great deal by then, but you were only getting started. Soon after that, you started your political career.
Yes, thank you, Susan. I served as Justice of the Peace, a position I held for 10 years. That's on top of me as being a Sturgis Township Clerk, Supervisor, and Postmaster. You know, I even made my way up to the Michigan State Legislature, where I served in the House for 1 term and the Senate for 3.
While in the Senate, Jonathan was part of the group that passed the resolution that allowed women to attend the University of Michigan. Several of our own residents, as well as many of our own descendants, were able to attend U of M because of his dedication to women's rights.
You know, it wasn't just women's rights. Susan and I were dedicated in bettering the lives of all people, especially the disadvantaged.
Which was the core belief of spiritualism, a religious movement in which Jonathan and I were highly involved.
You know, spiritualism is about believing in the afterlife.
And in the living communicating with the dead. I actually was a spiritualist medium and communicated with the dead quite often. This level of religious influence was unique to spiritualism because other denominations did not allow women to hold positions of power.
You know, we even built a church right in downtown Sturgis, and we called that church Free Church, where we welcomed everyone into our community, no matter what their religious beliefs were. Sadly, in 1920, that church was destroyed. But you might still know the land it stood on as Free Church Park.
Each summer for 60 years, we held meetings at Free Church. It drew attendees and speakers from across the country. It was great being among so many fellow spiritualists.
You know, spiritualism definitely was an important part of our life, but so was the life of business, something else we greatly influenced while living here. I've already mentioned my furniture factory, and by 1875, it became the first mechanized one here in town. That's on top of me as being a house builder, general store owner, Sturgis Journal proprietor, and a railroad agent.
Speaking of your time as a railroad agent, I think one of the most important things that our family did for the city of Sturgis was to secure the right-of-way for 2 major railroads through town. It put Sturgis on the map and really helped economic development.
You know, Susan, we sure did a lot to help build this city up.
Over the course of my life, I saw Sturgis grow from just one log cabin to a city of 4,000 people. It really was momentous.
And now here we lie in Sturgis, Oak Lawn Cemetery, resting.
Something we did very little of in life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nelson I. Packard, and I built the first hospital here in Sturgis, Michigan. It's still standing. You could probably recognize it, although it hasn't had patients in many years. I was born on April 8th, 1830 in New York City to my father, Ira Packard, it's actually right there, and to my mother, Emily Packard, who's also right there. I followed in my father's footsteps. He was a doctor, and later on in life, so was I. While living in New York City, I met a wonderful woman named Elizabeth, and we were married in October of 1856. A short time later, we took a giant leap of faith and actually moved from New York City to Sturgis, Michigan. Now, we didn't move alone. My parents actually moved with us. The joy and comfort of my new hometown and my new wife was short-lived, however. On April 14th, 1861, the Civil War broke out. I was mustered into the 11th Michigan Infantry along with a lot of other men from St. Joseph County. I became assistant surgeon, and I saw more death in 2 years than most people see in a lifetime. Now, the leader of the 11th was General William Lewis Stoughton. He was actually my next door neighbor, and well, he's buried right over there, so we're still kind of neighbors depending on how you look at it. I actually assisted in amputating his leg after the Battle of Missionary Ridge. In October of 1864, I mustered out of the Army and returned home. A few months after I got home, I received the best gift that a person can get after seeing so much death. It was the birth of my daughter, Effie Packard. Now, a few months after that, my father and I decided to invest in Sturgis businesses. We became stockholders in the newest bank, which was the First National Bank. A few years after that, I actually became president of Citizens Bank, which at the time was at 110 West Chicago Street. Now, even though I'd had success in the financial industry, I never forgot my first passion, which was healthcare. So in 1869, just 4 years after the Civil War, I built a combination home, office, and hospital. It was located on North Street, what actually became Pleasant Street. There it remained until my death in 1896 of myriad disease of the heart. My widow, Elizabeth, eventually sold the house to Dr. Frank W. Robinson. Now, Dr. Robinson actually converted the upper floors into rental areas and the basement into doctor's offices, which tend to frighten small children. It was called the Crusader Arms at the time. In 1987, the house was sold to Jeanette Johns. Now, she renovated the entire house and turned it into a bed and breakfast. She renamed it the Christmere House, which is the name it still goes by today. although it's been unoccupied for many years. I am proud to say that this house is part of my legacy, and even prouder to call Sturgis my hometown.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Wallace Weatherly.
Hello and welcome. My name is Wallace W. Weatherly. I was part of the first graduating class from the Sturgis Union School in 1877. I was also the very first person of color to open a law practice here in Sturgis. Now these two things, education and law, they were my lifelong passions, and I ambitiously pursued them despite facing many racial obstacles. I'm buried here in Oak Lawn Cemetery, far away from my birthplace down in Georgia, back where the red and blue flags are. I was born down in Georgia in 1847 as a slave. Now when the Civil War broke out in the 1860s, I was only a teenager, but in the chaos of that war, I found my path to freedom. You see, as the Union regiments invaded, I was among scores of other enslaved people who escaped bondage by attaching ourselves to the Northern soldiers. We traveled from camp to camp with them, working as servants for their officers. The regiment I traveled with was the 19th Michigan Infantry, which was full of men and boys from right here in Sturgis. So after that regiment was discharged, I traveled with them back to Michigan, where I began the next chapter of my life. When I arrived here, I boarded with several different families. I found work, but most importantly, I taught myself to read and write. I did this by using chalk on the side of a horse stall. And eventually I was able to earn a diploma from right over here at the Sturgis Union School, where I was part of their first graduating class. But still, my thirst for education was not satisfied. I even taught school for a while to help pay for my ongoing education. And as a result of this, I ended up going on to attend Hillsdale College, Michigan State Agricultural College, and eventually I made it over to God's Land in Ann Arbor, where I attended the University of Michigan, and I earned my law degree. Go blue. So anyway, I have, with that fine Wolverine degree in hand, I returned here to Sturgis and I opened up my very own private law practice. I actually also served as a notary and justice of the peace. And man, I was becoming quite a well-known and prominent man in this town, and I really enjoyed being part of that public sphere. Of course, not everything was easy for me. Race certainly played a role in the struggles that I faced. As a mixed-race individual, I identified myself as black, white, or mulatto at different times. But no matter my identity, the white citizens of Sturgis still sometimes saw me as inferior. For instance, I once ran as on the Republican ticket for Circuit Court Commissioner, and I ran a very noteworthy campaign. I canvassed this entire county, house to house on foot. But in the end, I was defeated by a very small margin. At the time, the Sturgis Journal called my opponent my white antagonist, acknowledging that race had played a role in my defeat. So sometime after losing that election, I ended up leaving my law practice behind, and I went to work as a day laborer on a farm. After building such a successful career where I was my own boss, why was I again going to work for somebody else? Well, it's likely that my race was a factor in this event. After all, this was a time when segregation ruled our country and black patrons weren't allowed in certain Sturgis businesses. However, history hasn't recorded the exact reasons why this happened, so the answers will lie with me here in my grave. And though I was not practicing my profession when I died in 1917, I still retain that fine education that I'd worked so very hard for. And that's something that could never be taken from me, whether black or white, slave or free. Thank you.
Hi folks, my name is Clarence Jesse. Welcome to my grave. Though I'm in this plot of earth now, much of my life was spent in the air. My uncle was a pilot when I was growing up, and I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to fly so much that one time my friend Joe Keller and I built a glider and flew it off a hill out in Sherman Township. We crashed, but nothing could wipe the smile off our faces. I started formal flying lessons after that, quickly excelled. My teacher was Von Eister out of Angola, Indiana, the state's first female commercial pilot. I was dating my future wife, Gwendolyn Taylor, at the time. She accompanied me to all my lessons and watched from the car. We married in May of 1936. Later that year, I became the first person to take a solo flight from Kirsch Municipal Airport here in Sturgis. I was only 26 years old at the time. The Kirsch Airport was established here in 1932, right at the height of airplane mania in the United States. Because of the new airport, Sturgis residents were excited to send and receive their mail by air. Airlines flying between Detroit and Chicago also used Kirsch as a convenient refueling stop. When the 1940s arrived, my family grew. My daughter Sue was born in 1941, and we lived on South Maple Street in the same house I grew up in. But things were not peaceful for long. World War II had begun, and there was a need for good pilots. I did my part by temporarily moving my family to Albany, Georgia, and going to work for Dar Aerotech Company. Here I taught young Army Air Corps pilots how to fly in my Stearman Cadet PT-17. After the war, my family and I moved back to Sturgis, and for a little while I flew with a buddy of mine in the air show. I remember how we used to dip our wings for the crowds. They loved it. My wife, on the other hand, did not. Those tricks made her so nervous, so my air show days did not last very long. I then began my career flying the company Beechcraft plane for Form Tubes in 1950. I got to fly all over the Western Hemisphere, transporting salesmen to places like Cuba and Central America. Most of the time, though, I flew back and forth between company plants in Alabama and Sturgis. I did this for 25 years before retiring in 1975. When I wasn't in the air, I was doing other things I enjoyed, like playing tennis or building ice boats to race across Klinger Lake in wintertime. I was also a member of the local Elks Lodge and First Presbyterian Church. I accomplished a lot in my life, and I'm happy to be remembered as a man who was always in the air.
Hello everyone, I'm Ray Kimball.
And I'm Elsie Kimball. Thanks for visiting our resting place here at Oak Lawn. It's so nice to be remembered by the town that we invested so much time in our lives.
We really enjoyed living in Sturgis, though we didn't grow up here.
That's right, we were both born in Orland, Indiana in 1889 to farming families.
And farming was something we never stopped doing. Both of us inherited our respective family farms and continued to run them for decades.
Well, I hired managers to run mine, but Ray was a true gentleman farmer. He was very involved with his livestock.
I was always looking for the next best way to innovate the farming practice, especially with the turkey operation I managed with my brother. We raised turkeys in North Dakota where it was nice and cold and distributed them all over rural areas so that families could have birds for their Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners. This was during a time before refrigerated trucks made it widely available.
And you know, the turkey business is actually what brought us to Sturgis. The railroad station here made it easier for Ray to travel.
That's right, and when I wasn't headed to the turkey farm, Elsie and I traveled all over the globe.
Yes, we traveled far and wide. We applied for our first passports in 1919 and then sailed to Cuba. But we didn't stop there.
Not even after our son Leon was born in 1920. In fact, we took our longest trip yet, a 3-month sightseeing tour of Europe, the Middle East, and Northern Africa in 1925.
And what a fantastic trip that was. We visited 20 different countries, including Spain, Italy, Egypt, Palestine, and Morocco. Now, usually we traveled by ocean liner for our international trips, but sometimes we drove cross-country around the United States.
And we did it in a vehicle we altered ourselves. Just like with farming, I was always looking to innovate. I put in cabinets for storage, an awning for shade, and an evaporator to keep food cool. These modifications really made our trips more fun.
Yes, they did. But when we weren't traveling, we were busy helping Sturgis become a better place to live.
Yes, and we did that a few different ways. Elsie, tell them about the campaign to build a women's clubhouse.
Oh, yes. Sturgis Women's Club has existed since 1894, and it's still an active part of our community today. I was a very dedicated member. I was even elected vice president of the St. Joseph County Federation of Women's Clubs in 1938. And in 1960, I was integral in getting our clubhouse built on Walker Street, right next to the hospital. That made our hospital auxiliary work much more convenient.
But you were a women's rights activist well before your work with the Sturgis Women's Club.
Yes, and I can't think of a more worthy cause. In 1914, I marched in Cleveland as a suffragist advocating for women's rights to vote. Now, women in Michigan didn't get that right until 3 years later in 1917, and nationwide suffrage didn't come to pass until 1920 when the 19th Amendment was ratified.
Elsie also was the first woman to have her own line of credit at Marshall Field's department store in Chicago. This was during a time when it was very difficult for women to open a credit account without their husband or father's approval.
It was important to me that we kept our finances separate. I'm very proud that I did.
It worked out well for us. You weren't the only one who had an interest in making the world a better place, though. I was involved with many local organizations like the Rotary Club, which is dedicated to community service and humanitarian work, and I also served on the Grobheiser Hospital's board of directors for many years.
You were also active in the political realm.
Right. I represented St. Joseph County Republicans at many state and national conventions, and I had the honor to serve as a delegate for the 1956 Republican National Convention in San Francisco, where we renominated President Dwight Eisenhower and Vice President Richard Nixon for the Republican ticket.
It was another chance for this gentleman farmer to travel across the country.
But back here at home, we worked together on a campaign to build the Kimball Chapel at the United Methodist Church.
And what a beautiful building that turned out to be. You know, giving back to the community and being generous with what we had, that's what was really important to us.
That must be why we were awarded the Book of Golden Deeds by the Sturgis Exchange Club in 1960, the first couple to ever earn that distinction.
I guess we were both so community-minded that they had trouble choosing between us.
They couldn't have awarded it to a more grateful couple. Thank you for visiting, everyone. Come again.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. My name is Helen Walton Bishop, and I was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1892. When I was 7 years old, my father moved our family to Sturgis to open his reclining furniture company. It would be called the Royal Chair Company. In September of 1911, I was introduced to a young man from Dowagiac by the name of Dick Bishop. He was very handsome and felt the same about me, and we were engaged by the end of September. We wed at the St. John's Episcopal Church on November 8th, and following our wedding, I moved into his mansion in Dowagiac before leaving on our honeymoon trip to Egypt and Europe. While in Egypt, I visited a fortune teller that told me that 3 events would shape my life. I was to survive a shipwreck and an earthquake, but eventually an automobile accident would take my life. Under that ominous prediction, Dick and I set sail home on a brand new ship called the RMS Titanic. It was the largest and grandest of the time. On the evening of April 14th, 1912, the first part of the prediction came true. The Titanic struck an iceberg and began to sink. In the early morning hours of April 15th, I was ushered into lifeboat number 7, the first to leave the doomed ship. My husband Dick and another newlywed couple were ushered in quickly behind me. Sadly, I had to leave behind my dog I had gotten in Italy in my estate room, and he was lost to the sinking ship. When we returned to New York, Dick and I were subpoenaed by Congress to testify about our events on the ship. Once back home, we settled into our everyday life, and on December 8th, 1912, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy that we named Randall. Sadly, he passed 2 days later. Following the passing of my baby boy, I was sick for some time, but once I recovered, Dick took us on a trip out west where the second prediction came true. We survived an earthquake. In November of 1913, Dick and I were celebrating our anniversary in Kalamazoo when on the way home we were in a tragic accident. I was tossed 30 feet from the automobile, taken to the hospital where a portion of my skull was removed and replaced by a metal plate. Luckily, I recovered and only suffered from mild epilepsy following the accident. Sadly, my marriage suffered even more, and in September of 1915, I filed for divorce, charging Dick with drunkenness and cruelty. After my divorce was finalized, I traveled with a friend by the name of Elizabeth Cannon on a cruise. It was the first time that an American chartered ship sailing underneath the American flag was permitted to set sail to the West Indies and the Panama Canal. Once we returned, I went home with Elizabeth to her home in Danville, Illinois. While in Danville, I began to experience severe head pains. I was treated by 3 doctors from Chicago, but unfortunately, the third part of the prophecy came true, and on March 15, 1916, I passed away from a hemorrhagic brain bleed that was exaggerated by my epileptic seizures from my prior accident. My body was brought back here to Sturgis, and I was laid to rest in the family plot. The large white cross underneath the tree was erected in my memory. 20 years after my passing, my mother quietly had my baby boy moved from the Dowagiac Cemetery to be laid to rest here with me. I am now with the one true love of my short but eventful life.
I do hope everybody's staying as warm as possible. Alone. We strive to make a single word not become the anthem of our lives, yes? My name is Thomas J. Collins, and I was born in 1855, a son of Irish immigrant parents. Now, my parents came to this country in the wake of the Great Potato Famine, despite some pretty severe prejudice against Irish Catholics at the time. Soon after my folks made that journey across the Atlantic, they both died, leaving me and my siblings orphaned. So alone, I came to Sturgis. I had secured a job as a ticket agent and a telegraph operator at the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railroad Depot. I wanted to work hard to prove myself to my employers, and I did just that, not only to my employers, but also to the community. And as the decades went on, so much so, in fact, I proved myself and to the community so much so, in fact, that as the decades went on, I was elected village president twice. And then in 1896, when the city was incorporated, I was elected as the first mayor of the city of Sturgis. So then, as the 1800s drew to a close, having served my term as mayor, I took on a new role as the vice president and a cashier at the new Citizens State Bank in downtown Sturgis. Now, that position allowed me the opportunity to work with a great many number of people and with quite a few different business ventures, including the Freemason Society. The Freemasons would become very important to me. I had never married, never had children, and didn't have any close family relation at all. And that the fellowships and the friendships that I made there would become very important to me after an accident in 1910. You see, a niece had come to visit me, and when she was finished with her trip, I helped her back to the train station, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to see all of my old colleagues there. So I helped her with her bags and got her all loaded and ready to go, and as I was about to step off the train, it lurched, and I had to make a jump to the platform. Now, I had done this a number of times during my employment there. It shouldn't have been any issue at all, but unfortunately, I was not as young as what I used to be, and I fell. So the next day, the papers made my accident a front-page story. Soon, all of Sturgis would learn that their beloved former mayor was involved in an accident requiring the amputation of both legs below the knee. Now, my involvement with the Masonic Lodge then became very, very important in my life, because the fellowships and the friendships that I made, they were the encouragement that I needed to endure such a horrific tragedy. Several years later, I would develop what I thought was just a strong cold, and today we understand that that would be called strep throat. So that infection grew without the aid of antibiotics at the time, and eventually my kidneys shut down. I died peacefully at my longtime residence, the Hotel Elliott, in downtown Sturgis. My obituary would report that I had more to do with the business life of the community than had any other individual at the time. It seemed that all of Sturgis would turn out to mourn my death. Businesses closed and even held moments of silence for me on the day of the funeral. My beloved Mason brothers performed the final ceremonial rites and laid me to rest here in beautiful Oak Lawn Cemetery. In the end, then, it would seem that I was certainly not alone, but surrounded by friends. Thank you.
Hello. I am Mary Hackstaff, and I was the first city librarian of Sturgis, Michigan. I was born Mary Ann Fletcher back in May of 1832, way over in Peru, New York, almost to the Vermont border. When I was in my 20s, I married Henry Hackstaff. He was a couple years my senior. He was from Peru also, and we were young. We were adventurous. So we decided to embark upon a 760-mile journey to travel from Peru, New York, all the way here to Sturgis, Michigan. And I really liked it when we got here. Henry ended up buying 90 acres of land over in Sherman Township. We cultivated 35 of those acres. We grew some corn and we grew some wheat. We raised some cattle, we raised some oxen, and we also raised some swine. And then life really started to get interesting. We started to have the children. First it was little Henry Jr., and then Herbert came along. But in April of 1861, when Herbert was only a year old, those darn Confederates went and attacked Fort Sumter over in Charleston and started that bloody Civil War. 2 years into the war, my Henry, in October of 1863, went off and joined the Michigan 4th Cavalry. You know, the horse unit, not where Jesus did his completed work for us, but the horse unit. Well, I knew he'd left in October, and the very next year in April of whatever year it was, I knew he wasn't doing well, because they transferred him into the 187th unit of what they were calling at the time the Veterans Volunteer Corps. Well, the Veterans Volunteer Corps was just a fancy name given to the Invalid Corps. Just the month before, March 18th. They changed the name hoping to help boost morale. Didn't help my Henry very much, because on June 25th of 1864, my whole world changed when my Henry went home to meet his maker. And of all things, he died of typhoid fever. He went off and joined the Civil War, you know, to fight the battle, be patriotic, and he dies of a disease. That wasn't so uncommon back then. The Michigan 4th had over 2,200 volunteers, and of that, they only lost just under 400 of them. Only 51 of those died from being mortally wounded in battle. The other almost 350 died from disease. Well, it's kind of poetic justice, because my Henry is buried on that Confederate General Lee's estate. He is in section 13, grave number 5,918 at Arlington National Cemetery. Well, life went on, and I had to go on too. And it was rough. I worked hard, keeping the farm going and raising the boys. Those were my great loves in life, my Henry and the boys. But I did have a couple things that gave me joy in life. One of them was education, learning, and books. So I went on to become a teacher, and I taught at the Union School. If you're familiar with the Sturgis Commons here in Sturgis, that's where the old Union School used to be. And I wasn't there very long at all before they made me their preceptress, which was a fancy name too for being, I was a teacher and a principal at the same time. Now, at times it was very challenging, but yet it was very rewarding to be able to be a part of the young people, the children here of Sturgis, to help with their education. And then in 1896, Sturgis became incorporated, and when they did, they took over the township library, and they made me the librarian. So hence, I was the first city librarian. Well, Sturgis had libraries since 1846 for 50 years. Sometimes, you know, about 100 books. When they took over the township library, if you wanted to visit, you could come on Monday between 2 o'clock and 9 p.m. or on Saturday from 7 to 9. But when you made me your librarian, we were open daily, and it was great. I really enjoyed it. It didn't last long, though. About a year and a half. That's all it lasted. Because on November 4th of 1897, at the age of 65 years, 5 months and 5 days, I went home to glory. And of all things, I died of typhoid fever, the same disease that took my Henry out just 33 years earlier. Well, you know, I hear in Sturgis, you have a gem of a library here. I hope you've visited it, checked it out, because I hear in like a given year, they can check out over 100,000 pieces of literature or books. And speaking of checking out, did you see my headstone? You see those flowers way back there, those mums? That's my headstone. You curious what it says? It says, Mary A. Hackstaff, 1832 to 1897, period. There's a period there at the end of it. And that's all my boys put on it. Is that. There's nothing on the back or the sides. But anyway, thank you for coming out here and visiting me here in the cemetery.
It's getting a little bit dark. It was a lot of fun. A great tour here in Sturgis, Michigan at Oak Lawn Cemetery. So if you liked today's video, please leave me a like, leave me a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And certainly look up these historical societies in your area for local cemetery tours, because they're really, really awesome. Thanks for watching.